September 1955, a full-page advertisement in Life magazine. A baby, round-cheeked, bright-eyed, not yet a year old, grips a bottle of soda with both hands. The copy beneath the photograph does not apologize. It boasts, "This young man is 11 months old," it reads, "and he isn't our youngest customer by any means." Beneath the baby, a recipe. Mix the soda with milk in equal parts, pouring gently. The ad calls this a wholesome combination. It says it works. This ran in one of the most widely circulated publications in the United States, paid for by one of the largest soft drink companies in the country. Millions of mothers saw it, and many of them did exactly what it said. Here is the question this entire story orbits. Why would a rational, loving mother look at that ad and do what it told her to do? The answer is not that mothers in the 1950s were careless. The answer is that every system around them, the advertisements, the science, the government, had been arranged deliberately to make that decision feel safe. Peel back one layer, and there's another, and each one is worse than the last. Start with what the mother actually saw. The ad described its product as so pure, so wholesome. You can even give it to babies and feel good about it. It pointed out that the company voluntarily listed its ingredients, framed as transparency, though the ingredients amounted to sugar, carbonated water, and citric acid. Nothing an infant's body needed. A follow-up ad appeared in November 1956 with a different baby and the same message. The campaign ran for years. Other brands followed. A 1953 ad from a different major beverage company described its product's wholesome quality as fitting naturally into the family picture, a picture that included children. Across brands, across years, the word wholesome was deployed with the consistency of a strategy. But what made these ads effective was not the word itself. It was the visual language. Pastel colors, soft lighting, smiling babies, and calm mothers, the vocabulary of safety and trust. The message wasn't buy our product. It was, you're already a good mother, and good mothers give their babies this. That's not a pitch. That's a reassurance. And reassurance is harder to resist than any hard sell because nobody argues with something that makes them feel like a good parent. The product didn't need to be good for the baby. It only needed to feel like something a good mother would do. In a culture that defined women largely through motherhood, rejecting the ad meant questioning your own competence. Accepting it meant belonging. The genius was in the framing. The advertisers weren't selling soda. They were selling membership in a community of modern, attentive mothers who trusted science, trusted progress, and trusted the photograph in front of them. They charged admission at the grocery store, one bottle at a time. And because the ads never raised their voice, never pushed, never demanded, because they spoke entirely in the language of comfort, there was nothing to push back against. You can argue with a salesman. You can't argue with a lullaby. So the first answer is clear. Mothers believed the ads because the ads were designed to be believed. They bypassed reason and spoke directly to identity. They made soda feel like an act of care. If you've been watching this channel, you know these stories don't stay buried. Someone always finds the truth. Someone always fights. If this is your first time here, subscribe because every episode ends the same way, with ordinary people dragging a hidden history into the light until the law has no choice but to follow. And here's a question for the comments. Before right now, did you know that soda was once advertised specifically for babies? Tell us what surprised you, because the deeper we dig, the worse it gets. Convincing ads can only work if nothing contradicts them. A mother in 1955 could have dismissed that ad if a nutrition label had listed the grams of sugar inside, if a government agency had reviewed the health claim before it went to print, if any independent voice had said this is carbonated sugar water and it does not belong in a baby's bottle. None of those voices existed, not because they couldn't, because the structures that would have produced them had never been built. No ingredient labels were required on soft drinks. A mother had no way to know what was in the bottle unless the company chose to tell her, and the companies that disclosed ingredients presented the list as a badge of honor, not a warning. No standardized format, no daily values, no way to compare one product to another, no independent body reviewed health claims before publication. If a company wanted to call a sugary drink wholesome and print that word beneath a baby's photograph, no agency had the authority to stop it. The Federal Trade Commission had limited power over food ads. The FDA had jurisdiction over labeling. But soft drinks fell into a regulatory gray zone. Not quite food, not medicine, not dangerous enough to trigger existing safeguards. The product slipped through every crack in a system that had never been built to handle it. Television amplified the vacuum. By 1955, 2/3 of American homes had a set. Companies spent more than $9 billion a year on advertising, a figure that had doubled in a decade. The industry understood what regulators hadn't. Repetition creates belief. Say something often enough, and it becomes wallpaper. Nobody questions wallpaper, and television did something print could never do. It reached children directly. A magazine ad had to pass through a mother's hands. A Saturday morning commercial bypassed the parent entirely. Studies from the era confirmed that the vast majority of food ads during children's programming promoted sugary products, almost exclusively. Young children lacked the cognitive ability to understand that a commercial was trying to sell them something. To a 4-year-old, a cartoon character holding a box of cereal wasn't an advertisement. It was a friend. The children were recruited to reinforce the message from the other side, asking for products in grocery aisles, making the purchase feel natural from every angle. So the second answer deepens the first. Mothers believe because there was nothing, no label, no regulation, no counter voice, to make them doubt. The conversation about what a child should eat was not a debate between interested parties. It was a monologue delivered by the seller, broadcast across every medium, repeated until it became indistinguishable from common sense. And the children themselves, too young to know they were being sold to, reinforced the message from the other direction, asking, pointing, crying in grocery aisles for the products they'd seen on screen, making each purchase feel inevitable. But even in a vacuum, science should have been the safeguard. And by the mid-50s, researchers were beginning to publish studies linking sugar to heart disease. The evidence was early but accumulating. It worried the people who sold sugar for a living. Their response was not to fund honest research. It was to buy the answer they needed. In 1965, the Sugar Research Foundation approached Frederick Stare, chairman of the nutrition department at Harvard. Stare and two colleagues, Mark Hexted and Robert McGandy, agreed to produce a literature review on diet and heart disease. The foundation paid them roughly $6,500, about $49,000 today. The expectation was unwritten but unmistakable. Emphasize fat, minimize sugar. A foundation executive selected the studies the team would review and gave feedback on drafts before publication. The paper appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967, in 2 parts, across 2 issues of one of the most influential medical journals in the world. Its conclusion, evidence linking sugar to heart disease, was limited. The real villain in the American diet was fat and cholesterol. The researchers disclosed nothing about who had funded them. The journal didn't require it until 1984. For nearly 2 decades, this industry-directed review helped shape the dietary guidelines of an entire nation. Fat became the enemy. Entire product lines were reformulated to be low-fat, often by replacing the fat with sugar, and sugar itself, the product that had underwritten the entire exercise, was quietly absolved. Not by science, by strategy. The mother in 1955 wasn't just reading an ad. She was standing at the end of a pipeline, an advertisement designed to bypass her judgment, inside an information vacuum where no counter voice existed, surrounded by a scientific consensus that had been purchased by the industry selling the product. Every layer reinforced the others. None were accidental. Hit subscribe if you haven't. The fight that came next took 22 years, and it deserves to be heard. Here's a second question for the comments. What food or drink from your childhood did you later realize was marketed to you before you were old enough to understand what marketing was? The ads manipulated, the vacuum enabled, the science was bots. But across 3 decades, a handful of people saw what was happening and refused to look away. On May 9, 1961, Newton Minow, the newly appointed FCC chairman, a 35-year-old lawyer chosen by President Kennedy, stood before the National Association of Broadcasters and challenged them to watch their own programming for an entire day, without a book or newspaper to distract them. He described what they would find: game shows, violence, formula comedies about totally unbelievable families, and, in the hours reserved for children, cartoons interspersed with relentless commercial interruption. He called it a vast wasteland. He noted that American children spent as many hours in front of the television as they spent in school, and that the diet of programming served to them amounted to feeding a child nothing but ice cream, school holidays, and no Sunday school. The broadcasters did not applaud. The speech made front-page news. Minow believed the industry could be persuaded to regulate itself. He was wrong. 7 years passed. Nothing changed. The wasteland grew vaster. In 1968, Peggy Charon sat in her living room in Newton, Massachusetts, watching Saturday morning cartoons with her 2 young daughters. Wall-to-wall monster cartoons, she later called it, and between them a barrage of commercials for sugary cereals and soft drinks aimed at children who couldn't read, couldn't reason, and couldn't tell a program from an advertisement. With 3 other mothers, Lillian Ambrosino, Evelyn K. Sarson, and Judy Chalfin, she founded Action for Children's Television in her living room. It started as a handful of parents around a kitchen table, no corporate sponsors, no industry backing. Their power came from the clarity of their argument and the stubbornness of their refusal to be dismissed. The Communications Act of 1934 required broadcasters to serve the public interest in exchange for using the public airwaves. Charon's position was simple. The airwaves didn't belong to the networks, they belonged to the public, and the public included children. Within a decade, 20,000 volunteers. Their first victory came in 1971 when they pressured vitamin manufacturers to stop advertising candy-flavored pills during children's cartoons, pills whose own bottles warned to keep them from children. The industry withdrew, proof that organized parents could move a billion-dollar industry. In 1978, the FTC proposed banning sugary food ads aimed at young children. The evidence was damning. By age 2, half the children in America had at least one decayed tooth. By 18, the average had 14. Pediatric officials described dental decay as the #1 childhood illness in the country. A study of Saturday morning television confirmed that the vast majority of food commercials promoted sugar-loaded products. The industry assembled a lobbying coalition that dwarfed anything consumer advocates had faced. Sugar trade groups, cereal companies, soft drink manufacturers, ad agencies, and broadcast networks united. They hired Washington's most powerful lobbyists. They funded counter-research. And on March 1st, 1978, the Washington Post called the FTC a great national nanny. The phrase was devastating. It reframed the debate entirely. Congress didn't defend the commission. Congress punished it, restricting its authority, then failing to renew its funding. The Federal Trade Commission was temporarily shut down because it had tried to protect children from sugar commercials on Saturday morning cartoons. And by 1981, the proceeding was dead. A new administration had installed a new FTC chairman who opposed the initiative. At the FCC, the new chairman, Mark Fowler, a longtime advocate of deregulation, declared that children's television should be governed by the marketplace, not the government. What followed was a systematic reversal. Captain Kangaroo, which had been on the air since 1955, lost its morning time slot. Schoolhouse Rock, which had taught a generation grammar and civics through animated shorts, was canceled. Saturday morning television didn't just become more commercialized. It became indistinguishable from the commercials. Entire programs were designed around toy lines, functioning as half-hour advertisements for action figures and dolls. Critics called them program-length commercials. Regulators looked the other way, but the FTC staff compiled 60,000 pages of testimony into a final document. Every study, every hearing transcript, every piece of evidence gathered over 3 years. Attorney Tracy Weston, who had led the rulemaking, later called it a message in a bottle, written for whoever might find the political will to try again. Peggy Sharon found it. For 9 years, through every political reversal, through the Reagan-era rollback of broadcast standards, through the years when children's television grew worse, she kept going. She testified before Congress so often that committee staffers knew her by first name. She organized letter-writing campaigns that flooded congressional offices. She gave interviews to any journalist who would listen, and she repeated one argument no one could answer. Children are not small adults. A 3-year-old cannot tell a program from a cereal commercial, and the airways belong to the public. She found allies, pediatricians watching childhood obesity climb, dentists treating more cavities in younger patients, educators seeing children shaped by commercial messages before they could read. The evidence dismissed in 1978 did not become less true. It became impossible to ignore. In October 1990, the Children's Television Act became a law. It capped advertising during children's programming at 10.5 minutes per hour on weekends, 12 on weekdays. It required every station to serve children's educational needs or lose its license. It gave the FCC real enforcement power for the first time. In 1996, the rules were tightened further. 3 hours per week of educational programming, clearly marked with the EI symbol that remains visible on screen today. Commercial breaks had to be visually separated from program content, so young viewers could begin to recognize where the show ended and the advertisement began. Peggy Sharon received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1995, the highest civilian honor in the United States. At the ceremony, President Clinton stood between her and Joan Gans Cooney, creator of Sesame Street. Peggy Sharon sounded the alarm, he said. Joan Gans Cooney developed an alternative. Sharon disbanded OSSIAD in 1992. The goals she'd set in a living room 24 years earlier had been written into law. The 60,000 pages from 1978 formed part of the foundation for those new restrictions. The message in the bottle had been found, and the sugar industry's paid science was eventually exposed. In 2016, researchers at the University of California, San Francisco published 1,500 pages of internal correspondence in JAMA Internal Medicine, laying bare exactly how the Sugar Research Foundation had directed the Harvard Review, selecting the studies, shaping the conclusions, paying for the outcome. The professors were dead. The executives were dead. But paper outlives everyone. The New England Journal of Medicine had long since adopted mandatory funding disclosures. The gap that made the manipulation possible was permanently closed. Remember the question we started with. Why would a rational mother give her baby soda in 1955? Now you know, because the ad told her it was wholesome, and it was designed so precisely that doubting it meant doubting herself. Because no label told her what was inside, and no agency reviewed the claim. Because the science that might have warned her had been rewritten by the people selling the product. 3 layers, each enabling the next. None accidental. Everyone has since been dismantled. The labels exist. The disclosures are mandatory. The advertising limits are federal law. The EI symbol in the corner of a children's program is there because 4 mothers in a suburb of Boston refused to accept what was being done to their children. For 22 years, through defeat and ridicule and the shutdown of a federal agency, until the country caught up with what they'd known from the beginning. The next time you pick up a can of soda, any brand, turn it around. Find the line that says sugar, printed in grams, with the percentage of a daily value beside it. That information is there because, for decades, no one was required to tell you what was inside. The industry called their products wholesome. They printed that word beneath a photograph of an 11-month-old baby and told mothers to feel good about it. The label doesn't shout, it simply tells the truth in small print on the back of every bottle, because someone, a long time ago, had to fight for your right to know.